Good morning.
Morning, Liz.
Woohoo, it's a hot one.
Morning, Tim. Morning, Madam Chair. You're muted, Lydia.
I can't see anybody or myself, so I didn't know that I was still muted.
We can see you now.
We can see you and hear you.
Hi. 1 second. Come on in. Sorry.
Who's it here?
I can't see anybody actually. Oh, I see some folks in. Okay. Okay. All right, here's everybody. Great. Is Matt coming on? Oh, Matt McCrate. I literally just said his name. He's here.
He better be.
He's in the attendee.
He's our expert.
He's in the attendee room at the moment. He's in. Okay. Can you also let Amelia Najarian? She's on my staff.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay. Can you see me now?
Yes.
Okay,
Hi,
great.
Nisa.
Hi, Mac.
Morning,
Hi.
everybody. I'm only here, actually, I'm sorry, I'm only going to be here for a few minutes. I'll try to log back in a little bit.
No problem. Thank you so much for coming in the time you could. So since it's 10:02 and we got some work to do, and I think we all are really excited to make this the strongest version of the condo conversion bill that we can. So I will formally just go ahead and start. Good morning, everyone. I'm Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of Housing and Community Development Committee. It is Monday, July 27, 2020, and we're here today for a virtual working session on 0389, order for hearing regarding the condominium conversion protections in the city of Boston. I'm the sponsor of this, and it was referred to the committee on February 12th in accordance with Governor Baker's March 12th executive order modifying open meeting laws. We are able to have this meeting on Zoom. This enables us to continue out our responsibilities while adhering to public safety and accommodations laws and necessities. The public may watch this meeting via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-TV. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date on Comcast 8/RCN 82/Verizon 1964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email and also will be made part of the record available to all counselors. So we have folks from the administration here. We also have been joined by my colleagues who I will announce. And I probably may not get the order perfectly, my apologies, but I have Councillor Bach, Councillor Braden, Councillor Sabi George. And that's it for right now. And we've been joined by the administration, Chief Sheila Dillon, Deputy Director of Policy and Research, Tim Davis, Director of the Office of Housing Stability, Dominique Williams, and I believe Amelia Najjar is with Tim Davis's office, am I correct? And the Policy Office of D&D. I hope I got everybody. Apologize if I missed anybody. The other, we've also been joined by, I have to just acknowledge our expert in the room, attorney, Mac McCrate, who's been working on this, is a friend to all and a guru in this particular area. As with most working sessions, this is about the work and getting into the language and making sure that we craft the strongest bill and ordinance for our city. I do not necessarily have to take public testimony, though I will if there's any folks who do want to join and may have a comment towards the end. But the focus is really being public about how we're negotiating and thinking about this law. With that being said, I'm going to just go ahead and turn it right over to the administration and Mac and really get down. Oh, excuse me, I apologize to my colleagues. If you had opening statements or any thoughts, feel free. at this time. Councillor Bach.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Just really glad to be here. I think this is a really important update for us to do. And obviously, for me, this is the first session that I've been able to join as a counselor on it. So looking forward to the work.
Councillor Braden.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here, sitting in my kitchen under a fan, trying to keep cool. I look forward to the discussion. I have so much to learn about this issue, and I look forward to participating. Thank you.
Councillor Sabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, just happy to be here, but also just want to note for the record that I won't be here very long, but we'll try to tune back in and certainly review this meeting on, I want to say on tape, on whatever it exists. But thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everyone who's here today.
Thank you. And to the administration, I didn't know if you wanted to walk through what we have right now, or do you want me to go ahead and walk through what we have and then you guys go through recommendations? Do you have a whole presentation? Kind of just open it up to.
No, we don't have any, I don't have any formal presentation, Counselor. You know, we have all wanted to strengthen the condo ordinance for many, many years. Because oftentimes, you know, by the time someone does a condo conversion, the building is emptied out, tenants are long gone. We need to find a way that it is forward-looking, not, you know, relying on tenants who are being displaced to know their rights, etc. We are hampered by state law, and that's why I'm so glad that Mac is here, because he really he does understand you know, what state law allows us to do and not do. He is the expert. So just want to get into it, but I think we all, on this one, we all share the same, you know, goal. Absolutely. That we really want to make sure that tenants are not displaced necessarily for condo conversion. So I look forward to the day, I look forward to the hour or so. Thanks.
Excellent. And just for folks' education, I'm going to go through what protections we have currently and also why we're doing this. We are doing this working session because the condo conversion law expired technically in 2019, and it was for a 5-year, a 5-year extension. So the original one happened in 2009, then it was extended through to 2014, and then it was extended again in 2014 to 2019. We understood that there was a lot of things we needed to get done, but it was coming towards the end of the year. So we extended the existing protections, which I will go through, for 1 year to give us the time and the ability to make sure we got the strongest law. Those protections include notice periods for elderly, disabled, and low to moderate income tenants to be given a 5-year condo conversion eviction notice before landlord convict or convert for a condo. All of the tenants are entitled to a 1 year. The right of first refusal to purchase the unit. Tenants are entitled to purchase their units before anyone else can buy them on the same or more favorable terms as those offered to the public. And this, they have a 90-day offer, right of first refusal. Relocation assistance. Landlord must provide elderly, disabled, or low to moderate income tenants with assistance in locating accessible and comparable apartments within Boston. Limitations on rent increases for those that do stay in those extended leases. The rent increases are restricted during notice period to percentage increases in the CPI or 10%, whichever is less. Just cause evictions are currently part of the protections. Tenants under notice may not be evicted without a good reason or cause, and landlords must provide just cause in court. And relocation benefit. The tenants who voluntarily vacate their units during the notice period and are current in their rent payments are entitled to relocation benefits from the landlord. As of December 3rd, 2014, when the ordinance was extended, it's $10,000 relocation benefit for elderly, disabled, and low to moderate income tenants, and $6,000 for everyone else. I think that I have summarized the basics of it. And in the last, we had a really good hearing where we learned a lot about the limitations of the law. And one of the biggest ones is that it applies to only buildings with 4 units or more. But we have found that majority of the condo conversions are happening in triple deckers. And so, as a matter of fact, I think it's as high as 89% of the condo conversions are happening in triple deckers. And so as a result, we are dealing not only with the fact that the law limits us in who we can protect, but also how much we can do to prevent their evictions, especially when, as Sheila mentioned, there's a lot of clear outs. So people will just say, I bought the building empty, so I don't owe anybody anything. So we've invited counselor, or excuse me, I'm going to make everyone a counselor today. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We've invited Attorney Mac McCrate from Greater Boston Legal Services to walk us through possibilities for strengthening this law, to answer any questions as well, and to make sure that we're all on the same page and being able to make this as strong as possible. Counselor Attorney Mac McCrate,
Yes.
so sorry. I was wondering if you could walk us through some suggestions that you have
Sure.
to help us strengthen the law.
Sure. And let me just go back a little bit on this because some background may be helpful for people. So back prior to 1994, Boston did condominium conversion regulation under rent and eviction control laws. And when the rent and eviction control laws went away with question 9 by a narrow vote of the Commonwealth in that year, that law said that you could continue condo regulation, but you'd have to use the statewide law. And that statewide law set certain basic frameworks, but it also allows cities or towns to, by a supermajority, to pass different or more stringent regulations. And so that's what Boston, in fact, did. For a while, Boston did it, and there was a challenge by the Greater Boston Real Estate Board. And so the SJC said Boston went a little bit too far, and so had to go back in 1999 and tweak what was done. And so what we've been working with since 1999 has been that basic framework. And it's because that statewide law says you cover buildings of 4 or more, but you can't cover under 4, that you have the problem about what we can cover and what we can't. The statewide law also on the supermajority requires a 2/3 vote. So whenever votes are done by the council, it's not been a simple majority vote of 7-6. It's been a vote where I think there needed to be at least 9 votes in the affirmative. And further, it has to be emergency regulation, which means that there needs to be various findings of fact that are made about what the current state of housing emergency is in the area, and it's time limited. And so usually that time limit has been a 5-year increment. Last year, when we were discussing this with the council members then, the discussion had been about several weaknesses in the existing law that it would be good to shore up. So one of them was there was a decision from the housing court that had found that there was some ambiguity about how owners who were going to be owner occupants got treated and whether or not they might be able to evict a tenant for that faster than might otherwise be the case. That one looked like it was an unintentional glitch in the drafting that just required a little fix in some language. There was a second housing court decision that was problematic in that there was a building that had 6 units in it, and the owner was going to convert it to condos, but the way the owner was going to convert that to condos was going to be to basically do gut rehab and then come back with a building that had a smaller number of condos. And so the housing court judge there said, well, the condo law as the city currently had it wouldn't apply there because people wouldn't have the right to purchase because their existing unit wouldn't be purchasable because the units would all get reformulated and got rehabbed. And so it was just a hole in the middle of the ordinance. I remember talking about this during one of your working sessions last year because I remember Greg Vassell from Greater Boston Real Estate Board was there. And he basically said, yeah, there should be something that the council could do about demolition. Should be able to do something where you're being able to sort of control your supply in one way or another. it was in the context of thinking about that particular one that we then had a more prolonged discussion with both council members and with the administration about this whole idea of what happens when there's these emptying outs. Because what can happen is an owner can come in, offer money, or sometimes it's an illegal eviction, or sometimes it purports to be a legal eviction or whatever, but people clear out of the building and then the building is empty. And then at the time it comes to the council for a condo conversion, there's no one there. And so it's a fairly simple process. In fact, there's no real process on that because the current law is all driven by occupants. And so if there's an occupant there, the occupant claims protections of an extended notice period, relocation benefits, just cause, and so forth. If there's no occupant there, it just goes full speed ahead. So the notion would be that before you do a fresh conversion, there would need to be some kind of approval process for that, like a removal permit. And the notion would be that the owners coming forward proposing conversion would need to come forward with all their information about the tenancies so that you'd be able to establish there was no involuntary displacement that took place. And sometimes if it was like somebody says, well, I've just owned it for 2 months, I don't know, then it's part of their obligation to pull those documents and the information from the prior owners to come forward. This is not that foreign a concept. Back in the 70s and early 80s, Boston had something which we called vacancy decontrol. And the notion there was people didn't lose rent control protections for units where there was involuntary displacement that caused people to leave their units. But on the other hand, if it was a natural move out where people had notice of their rights and had moved out naturally, then it might be able to get decontrolled. But there was a whole process and the owner had to sort of come forward, document their case and make their case to a city body. Now, the notion that there's be some city regulation on this is a different step than what we currently have. Right now, there's very little city regulation about this in terms of an agency that blesses the conversion process, but it's certainly something that could be done. And it's the only way that you're really going to get at this question of was there involuntary conversion or not. And so that would be the notion. And when we chatted about this some, I think at the time we did the drafting on this last summer, Somerville had not yet passed an ordinance. Somerville since then has passed an ordinance which is a removal permit ordinance. Now Somerville's is a little bit different than Boston's because Somerville can cover smaller units because they have a different enabling law. But the concept in Somerville is the same. They too say we need to really get at this question about what's going on here with these units and making sure that there's not been a pattern of displacement that happened that caused the units to be emptied out first, but that we're really serious about this so that owners don't have an incentive to just empty out, cash in. And so that part of the Somerville process is similar. I think I shared with council staff some of the regulations that Somerville's housing division has passed on this. How much of that you want to put in your own ordinance versus how much of it you'd give to whoever you're going to make be the body that would regulate this. That's really your call, but that's the notion.
And so essentially, first I want to acknowledge we've been joined by Councillor Mejia and Councillor Flynn.
Great.
Councillor Mejia, I don't know if you had an opening statement or wanted to say anything. Councillor Mejia? Okay. And then Councillor Flynn.
I'm sorry, Counselor Edwards, I'm on my phone and sometimes I can't find these little buttons, but I'm here listening along. And when it's time for questions, I do have some. So just thank you for hosting and thank you for giving us an opportunity to be a part of the dialogue.
Thank you. We've also been joined by Counselor Janey. Counselor Flynn? Counselor Flynn or?
Madam Chair, Councillor Flynn mentioned he was having trouble with audio.
Oh, okay, so that might be, okay, we'll just work that out and let him have an opportunity later. And Counselor Janey?
No opening for me, thank you.
Very well, thank you, Counselor Janey. Just for the colleagues that just joined, we are going through, Counselor Flynn, I see you. Can you hear us? I might have a problem with audio. So we were just going through a little bit of history about the condo conversion, and also one of the biggest, I think, honestly, it's the biggest issue that we have, which is building clearouts. Our neighbors in Somerville has come up with a somewhat, I think, creative way to deal with that. The biggest issue being that they clear out the building and then say there's no tenants to help with the, or no tenants to actually provide information about. So we're going to work through, I think it's a very innovative way, and I'd love to hear the administration's thoughts on this removal permit and how it might work and who would enforce it in Boston, if possible. And then I don't know if any of my other colleagues after me or after the administration speaks, maybe has some collective ideas and thoughts about what we could do. So I will turn it over to Sheila Dillon. I see Councillor Flynn. I don't know if you can hear me, but I have seen your text messages. I'll see what I can do on the back end to help you participate. Sheila, Chief Dillon.
Sure. So as Mac had mentioned, last year we were having lots of discussions about how within, with what we can do with the state enabling law, what can we do? And so what we had thought about, and I think Mac had outlined, is having anyone who is going to do a conversion able to report and certify that the the ordinance was adhered to, and that building was not emptied out for the prior year. So even if you had just bought the building, you wouldn't buy that building unless the former owner was giving you very, very good information about who was living there, certified that they were given proper notice, all of that. And so it would be some type of certification that they were coming forward to some city agency. Now, what we hadn't done is we hadn't identified the city agency. So where it sits, is it ISD? Is it with D&D? Is it some combination? Is it with the BPDA? I don't know. We can certainly talk about that. Makes sense. But that no one could do a condo conversion without providing information on what happened to those tenants a year back, and making sure that they were given proper notification and rights under the condo law. Excuse me. So I think that's what we're coming up with. All the details weren't worked out, but we thought that no one was going to buy a building unless they were buying or getting that really good, complete information, because they would have to certify it as being true, accurate and true before they were allowed to convert. So that's sort of as far as we had gotten our thinking. I don't know, Mac or Tim, if you have anything else you want to add.
I have a couple questions. So if this is a removal permit kind of concept, essentially we're preventing them from continuing on with their conversion until they show that they've met certain standards of the law.
Correct.
And I understand that they would have to submit for a variance or submit a certain permit. They'd have to acknowledge to the city that they are trying to create condominiums. It's not like they can say, I'm submitting for, I don't know, converting a 2 to a 3. I mean, how would we know, I guess, is my first question. So when you go to submit to make, right? So if they're submitting for a condo, I would like to take the triple decker in East Boston and make 3 condominiums. I'm assuming that's given notice to the city, then the entity that gets that notice, I think, is ISD. And shouldn't they be the ones then that turn around and say, where's your demonstration of providing notice to the tenants?
Right. So right now there is no scheme about who that goes to. And again, let's leave the 3-unit out because we don't have coverage for
4
3.
units, sorry.
Let's say
You're
it's a
right,
4-unit. Okay.
Okay.
So right now there may be other things that are required for ISD, such as showing construction, showing whatever else is required for the rehab that they're planning for the property. But there isn't any requirement with ISD to give the notice. And in fact, when the revised ordinance was passed by City Council in 1999, it basically, there wasn't any requirement to upfront notify a city agency, but instead, what would happen is the residents would have the right to petition a city agency if they thought, I'm not getting the right information. Or for example, I should get a prolonged notice period, like a 5-year, as opposed to a 1-year, because this owner is saying, I'm, just a regular person, but in fact, I'm low to moderate income or elderly or disabled. So there was a role for something called the center, which was the old rental housing resource center, which used to be the rent equity board. But because there had been an experience where the real estate industry had been concerned about too much regulation by the rent equity board, it was very stripped. So what was in the 1999 law had very little role for that center. There is no rental resource center anymore. It was based at DND for a while, but it's kind of folded up. So the Office of Housing Stabilization, I think, is the closest successor to that body in terms of sort of role that it takes, because the role is different than, say, the ISD role. ISD role is far more looking at construction, whether or not there's disruption happening to services during construction, things like that. And probably would be more so an entity within DND, but again, I left this is an issue to be sorted out between the administration and council. I certainly wasn't going to venture into that thicket about where people.
Oh, come on in. The water's fine. Come on in. Enjoy. Okay, so the question, I think, for a lot of folks and for my colleagues, the issue that we're trying to resolve or think about is, again, the building clear outs. And when the building is empty and people then purchase it, they say there's no tenants to give any rights to. Right. So that's one thing. And the other, there are other major components of the law that also are up for improvement, like the notice periods. Councilor Flynn had thought about extending those. The right, I think the limitations on rent increases, we wanted to talk about those, and also increasing the financial rent assistance. So those things are to come. But I wanted to make sure that folks were on this topic about the loopholes. So this is it. None of it comes if there are no tenants there, as they keep saying.
Right. That's correct. And I think the only thing the council has done in the past is on relocation benefits. So other than that, the basic framework, that's been the only enhancement that's been done since 1999. Yeah.
Oh, so we're due for an upgrade, I'm sure. Yeah. So for those who, I guess I'm neutral. I assumed that because ISD is the first point of contact for somebody, it might be the first agency to know that people are going to convert a building into condos, that they would also just make it part of their process. How would we envision, would a person then have to go to ISD and then ISD says, OHS, this person's here to do condos, OHS confirm or talk to them, or how in terms of administrative burden, how do we move this? I will just put it out there, I think it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense to have this kind of, and I don't know if you want to call it a removal permit, because does that require an ordinance for us to create that new permit?
It requires tweaking your ordinance, but it doesn't require new enabling authority.
No. I mean, in terms of, we're creating a new permit.
Right.
Can we do that in this ordinance, or do we have to, are we updating the zoning code?
You absolutely can do it in this ordinance.
Are we updating the zoning code by doing this in this ordinance?
No.
Okay. I'm I'm really trying to make sure we hit all the points. That's honest to goodness. So I'd love to hear from you, Dominique, as the director, your thoughts of how and where this could flow. Chief Dylan, just assume I'm a normal person. I bought a 4-family. I want to make this a condo. Tell me what I have to do now. I'm going to go to ISD and then this new removal permit. So what do you envision?
I don't know if we want to use removal permit, Mac. I don't know if there's any reason we have to use a removal permit. It's just got such a long history that people might confuse it with, what happened, rain control, et cetera. So if we said you have to get a permit to do a condo conversion, you go to ISD, I assume that you're applying for building permits as well. It's probably part of this because most of them are renovations.
Right.
And then ISD says, oh, yep, you've checked I'm making this up. You've checked the condo box. If we want to go the Office of Housing Stability route, you need to work with them to see if all of the tenant work, notifications, displacement, et cetera, has been done properly. And no one was displaced because of this. It wasn't emptied out with this intent. And then I assume that OHS, if that's what sort of the administration decides, would give a developer a clean bill of health and say, yes, the building's been vacant for 5 years. It's been a derelict shell, whatever, they find. And then it goes back to ISD and the person gets their condo permit. I'm making that up. I think it needs further discussion, but I could envision something like that.
Could you envision in general, no matter what, that they would have to go to OHS and OHS has a packet that's uniform and clear, maybe multilingual, and that it's, because this is assuming that they're saying, yes, I did everything, and they can prove to OHS I did everything. I'd rather just take that burden of proof away and just simply say, I'm going to make some condos. So as a result, I need to get this special permit or demonstration, and I go to OHS. OHS gives me the documents or gives me what I need to give to the tenants, or gives me, or I prove to OHS or something that there are no tenants there, which is over the last year.
Which is going to be the case. I think most developers are going to show up with an empty building, and they're going to say, I bought the building and the owner has certified that the building has been vacant for 366 days or whatever, because, I think, I bought the building and 6 months ago, the owner said this might happen. I'm going to sell the building. It might happen. So I'm going to give you notice. And everybody took the relocation benefit that is pursuant to the condo ordinance. So I think they're going to have to certify that whatever we determine is the right set of things that they must do, they're going to have to certify that those things happen before they can move on and apply for a condo permit.
Okay.
I think.
And
Mac's my go-to. Mac, does that sound right?
I think that's right. I mean, the thing is, let's say you call it not removal permit, but just a conversion permit. But you're going to have to cover both worlds. So it's both going to be the vacant building, but you're also going to have owners with occupied or semi-occupied buildings that may be coming for conversion permits too. And for those, they're then giving the tenants the packet at the same time. They're saying, if this gets approved, here are the whole sets of rights that you have. So you'll have both populations there. The other thing that you might have as a trigger, and I know this used to be a trigger with rent equity, was taxes. So the assessor's office oftentimes was often the very first place that found that a place was going condo because it was going to change the assessment.
Wow. But that would usually be a year after the fact, no?
No, it was actually done up front. It was under Traeger. So it used to be that there was actually a fairly close relationship between assessing and rent equity about all of this stuff. So it got moved from one office to the other office when that was happening.
Okay.
This is Tim Davis. One thing that we do now is that we monitor conversions. And so if there is a master deed filed at the Registry of Deeds, we know about it fairly quickly. So whether you just formalize that process, that could be something for further discussion as well.
Okay.
And just to jump in here, I definitely think that this is all something that our office is equipped to handle. Once we do find out that a building is being converted, we send out a postcard that just informs tenants of their rights, informs them that they're not required to leave. So we could certainly put together a packet that's more substantial than just the postcard. I think we have the tools to be able to effectively manage the amount of mailings that would need to go out from this with our Salesforce system, and kind of tracking where some of the potential turnover could be. So I'm on, our office, OHS, is on board with all of this.
And
Great.
just so to give you an idea of the volume, we're getting about 23 buildings with 4 more units per year. So it's not a substantial number of buildings each year.
Kim, you want to tell folks how many smaller buildings are getting converted?
I have that number.
Well, Councilor Edwards got the number correct in her earlier. It's 89% of the buildings that are being converted are 1 to 3 unit buildings. And so we may have about 240 buildings per year converted, but only 23, or only about 10%, 11% are the buildings that might be covered by this ordinance.
If just to give some data for my colleagues that Sheila or Chief Dillon actually gave us, I think in the prior hearing, in 2,939 units were turned into condos between 2014 and 2019. And that is compared to only 1,312 in the previous 5 years before the last change to the city ordinance. So that's about 124% increase in conversions. Dorchester has seen the most conversions over the past 5 years, 198 buildings, followed by East Boston with 163. And now state law forbids regulation of properties with fewer than 4 units, which according to our numbers, the conversions in properties fewer than 4 units account for 89% of the condo conversions. So what we're talking about right now is 11%. In Suffolk County, middle income households have 74% of income needed to purchase a mid-price house, and only 66% of income needed to purchase a mid-price condo. In 2018, over 20% of condo sales were over $1 million. So those are just some of the.
Yeah, one other population that's actually protected, but it isn't affected one way or the other by proposed changes we're talking about here, is there are some people that are in buildings that got converted a long time ago, but because of the prolonged 5-year period, and it's not just presumed that because a building was converted, you're actually going to be evicting for the purpose of condo conversion eviction. Once an owner realizes I've got to do a 5-year notice for that, sometimes they'll back up and they won't proceed with that actual displacement. So there are still people that are actually protected under the old rent control laws that had what were called eviction ban status under that system that are still in their same apartments. I still get those calls from people in Brighton, Roslindale, a few other locations in the city. They're few and far between, but they still exist. Whoops, can't hear.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to turn it over so my colleagues can start asking questions. Again, we're kind of on the clear out issue before we get to the other improvements that we already have. So I have, again, Councillor Bach, Councillor Braden, Councillor Sabi George, if she may have stepped out, Councillor Mejia, Councillor Flynn, and Councillor Janey. So Councillor Bach.
Yeah, sorry, I'm still just trying to get up to speed. So I guess what if somebody could just repeat for me here clearly, what's the case that we currently can't handle that we think we could handle through this legislation from a clear out perspective?
What this would give you a hook on is the buildings where it's already been emptied out, and you're then wanting to look at how did that happen? Was it proper? Well, did people just naturally move out, or was it like a cause eviction? so the unit became vacant, versus 6 months before they actually did a condo deed, where they like handing out people money and saying leave, or cutting off utilities and having people leave. So this gives you an ability to look at that and either say, yeah, that looks okay, you can get a permit, or no, this doesn't look okay because you were improperly trying to get people out.
And obviously the point of doing that, of having such a mechanism, would be to discourage people from that improper behavior because they know that they'd get caught. Would
Correct.
we have, do we have the latitude within an ordinance to impose a penalty? Like what could we conceivably do? Like, I get that the point here isn't the penalty. The point is using this as a way to discourage the action, but for it to discourage the action, there has to be a plausible penalty. So like, what conceivably could that look like?
That the last part's a little tricky because I could imagine someone might litigate that question if it was penalties beyond just, I'm not going to give you a conversion permit. Like, I'm going to find that you committed a violation of quiet enjoyment or 93A or something like that. Whether or not that could be done within this ordinance or not, we'd probably need to check with Corporation Counsel on some of those issues. But you could try, and you could write the ordinance in such a way that if there were problems with that, it wouldn't affect the rest of your scheme.
Or could we consider, and this is a question to Mac, treble damages for the relief that's currently in the statute. So if there was seniors who were, pushed out of here, or one of the protected classes of individuals, they're supposed to get $10,000 if they didn't get that, for example, right? Because they were pushed out in the quiet of the night, or they were just, told whatever to get out, and they left. If we know who they are and we can find them, why not triple damages or something that requires them? And
you could certainly try to do that. Again, I don't know if there at some point a court would find you went beyond what you could do. That's always an unknown in this area.
Well, what about what we can do in the statute then? Just getting the $10,000 for the person. They were supposed to help them in finding a new place to live. They were supposed to help them. They were supposed to be able to stay in the building. All of those different things.
Right. So you would say, what
Sorry
was
to
the
cut you off,
closest
Councilor
thing
Bob.
what was the closest thing to making that person whole? Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Councilor Bob.
in terms of denying the conversion permit itself, like what's the sort of like time period constraint? I'm just thinking about
So
I remember growing up with a building in our neighborhood where there was very strong suspicion that the owner had burned it down for insurance purposes, and so sort of various permits to replace it had been denied as kind of part of managing that action. But then it also ended up with a weird situation where we had a vacant building for decades, and so I'm just curious, kind of how do we think about just denying a conversion permit? Can we do that indefinitely? Like, does it force a change in ownership? Is it just something where we're slapping the person's hand and they wait a couple of years and come back? Like, what does that piece look like?
So when we were looking at the enabling law, that's why there's a 1-year look back provision in the enabling law, which is probably the outside limit for what can be done. So probably even if a building was cleared out 2 years ago, and now they're coming forward to seek a permit, probably cannot reach back that far given the language that's in the current enabling law, but could reach back to find out what was going on during the last 12 months. If you could make an argument that the intent to convert existed within 12 months of the clear out, then you might be able to go back that far. But that, I think, is the outside limit. And we've had some discussions about this with the administration.
But you could, Mac, you could deny, so if someone violated, something bad happened within the 1-year look back, you could deny the condo permit, you could deny it, so they'd have to create rental housing, or, you could deny it because it wasn't done properly.
And just to understand, this doesn't regulate, for example, someone's conversion to luxury housing. So if someone
Right.
says, I'm taking this affordable rental housing and I'm changing it to luxury rental housing, this doesn't regulate that at all, because the enabling law only gives you the ability to breach it where it's going to be condo conversion.
Right.
We are
And so
pretty limited. We're pretty limited in what we can do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so but basically what we're doing is we're saying, like, if somebody can afford to be a bad actor and then keep their building vacant for more than a year before they apply for the conversion, there's not much that we can do to force that. And so, but we're putting by having this 1 year look back, we're putting a higher price tag on your decision to treat your tenants poorly, because now you're sitting with a full year of vacancy. And once you get the conversion, you presumably have some friction time. So we're sort of putting a time cost on
That's-
that kind of bad action.
that's
Is that
correct.
right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll let others ask questions.
Thank you. And before I turn it over to Councilor Braden, is the 12 months a requirement, or could we look back further? And
I think again, I would defer to others who may want to look at this, such as Corporation Counsel, but it looked to me like that's something that may be a hard stop within the enabling law. And we have
Okay.
to be careful about that, because that's where we've gotten burned before.
very well. Councilor Braden?
And this might seem like a strange question, but if a rental property has 3 units and then it is being converted into condos with the addition of 2 or 3 other units, how does that work out in this scenario?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure. Because
That's a good one.
Great one.
We'd have to look back at the statewide law on that, because there's some things that also regulate when newly created units come into being, then they may not also be regulated under the statewide law. So there's some exceptions in the statewide law on that. If on the other hand, what you did was you had very large apartments and you split them up. So it's like what was originally a 1 large apartment became 2. So you changed a 3 to a 6.
Yeah.
That would probably be subject to regulation. And again, also the city's records on this are not necessarily accurate. I've had buildings that I've been involved with where part of the city's record says it's a 3-family, like ISD, but you'd go to the rent equity board and the rent equity board would tell you it was a 6, and they had it registered there as a 6. And that's in fact how the landlord was renting it out, even though ISD never had it on record that way. So that's unfortunately the best answer I can give you on that one.
Yeah.
But others may have thoughts on this.
It's one I come across pretty regularly out here in Brighton. So.
I'm not
Yeah.
surprised.
It is a Brighton condition though. So if you do have a 3-family or a 2-family, someone's tearing it down and building 10. I think that I wrote it down. It's worth looking at to see if we can't do something with that.
Yeah, the other strange thing that's happening out here, and this might be a completely different scenario, is sort of the other way of going, is that we have instances of people who get permitted to build new condominiums, and then they say, oh, the market's too soft and we're going to go to rentals, and that's a whole other ball of wax. So I'm not even going to get into that right now.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Councilor Sabi George had warned us she may have to step out. So I'm going to go to Councilor Mejia and Councilor Flynn. I don't know if we resolved the issues. Can you hear us?
Hey, Councilor Edwards.
Excellent.
I can hear you.
Did you want to
Thank you,
make any
Councilor
brief
Edwards.
statement, Councilor Flynn? Because you couldn't before.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. I just want to say thank you to Councilor Edwards, to you for the work that you're doing on this important issue, along with Mayor Walsh's team. But Councilor Edwards, you're really doing the incredible work of making sure the low income residents, their voice is heard. So I want to acknowledge that. It's an important conversation that we're having because of the housing crisis that we're facing in the city. And with the pandemic, the ongoing pandemic, the situation may be getting worse for many tenants, as we know, because we feel those calls every day. And I'm glad to know that the elderly, our seniors, persons with disability, low, moderate income tenants I think they must be given a 5-year condominium or cooperative conversion eviction notice before a landlord can start an eviction action. And I know that we extended these protections in 2019, but we should still consider potential updates on a condo conversion ordinance, especially considering potential shifts in housing. Thank you also to Chief Sheila Dillon in her team. But during this pandemic, especially, it's crucial that we remain a city of low income residents, of persons with disabilities, our seniors, communities of color. But I don't want to see major developers also trying to manipulate the system and thinking no one's paying attention during these crucial times, because city leaders are paying attention, and we're not going to let any fastballs get by the plate, because we're going to advocate for the tenants and for the residents. So I just want to be clear that we really have to pay close attention to any developer that wants to be cute and wants to try to manipulate the system to their advantage. We need to follow and pay close attention. But I also know that, as I heard comments earlier, that city departments must be talking to each other at all times, sharing information, updating computer information to make sure we have the most updated records available, that there is a community process during this time as well. But again, I want to make sure that major developers can't manipulate the system and try to take advantage of it during this crucial time in our city. Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Mejia.
Yes, good morning. So I just have a few questions. Thank you for hosting this again, Councilor Edwards. Just really quick, Chief Dillon, you mentioned proper notification as a part of the condo conversion process. Are landlords required to post conversion notice in languages that the tenants most effectively communicate in? Is there ever a circumstance where tenants aren't properly informed of what's going on in their buildings because of the language barrier?
That, I'd have to go back and read the ordinance. It's a really very, very, very good point, and something we can strengthen as we rewrite or improve and update the condo ordinance. The issue, which is pretty tragic, is that typically an owner empties out a building and then it starts converting to empty buildings, so there's no one there to notify. And that's what we really need to fix. But I think we need to look at the language piece of any new ordinance that we write. So thank you for raising that. We just got to make sure, though, that the tenants that are there know their rights, and we're being more mindful that they're not saying, oh, the building was empty, I don't have anything I need to do. So, but I think it's a really good point. We should look to strengthen that language.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to ask Councilor Flynn to put himself on mute. Messing up my flow up in here. Thank you very much, Councilor Flynn. Mute yourself. Okay, so I'm also curious in regards to how tenants are informed about their rights when a building is converted into condos, and whose responsibility is it to keep them informed?
So right now, it's the owner's responsibility to notify the tenants when they do a conversion. And you're absolutely right that those communications need to be in languages that people are going to understand. part of the weakness, I think, of the pre-existing scheme was because they had so stripped the city of the ability to do that. The city wasn't before now able to say those things. So I think it would be helpful as part of adding to the city's authority, just like it's going to have some body that would review conversion permits. The city can also make sure that the communication is effective. So if the owner is saying, well, I'm going to communicate this with my residents who are Spanish or Portuguese or Cape Verdean speaking, that the city says, fine, can you show us what you're planning on sending before you send it out? So we're sure it's accurate and it's not telling people things that would mislead them about their rights.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there's any way for us to enforce that a little bit more in terms of just the rights, because I often think that people really don't understand what their rights are. So I just would encourage us to add some language that will enforce that. And then the other question that I have is, what does the reallocation assistance look like? How much effort does the landlord have to put in when it comes to relocating their tenant? What happens if a landlord does not or cannot find a comparable apartment in time?
Okay, that's a good question. So the way that it usually works is that there is, initially they can send a shorter notice period to an individual who's low and moderate income, elderly or disabled, and say that they are diligently assisting the person in finding housing. And if, let's say the person had a Section 8 voucher, and the owner actually went out and hired somebody who was going to do diligent housing search and help the person place them with their Section 8 voucher into a unit that had similar features, was not negative, and so forth, that owner might be able, in those circumstances, to have a shorter notice period. But they would have to show that it was really comparable, and comparable can include things like neighborhood. So, if the person says, I've lived in Alston Brighton, I really don't want to be disrupted from the Alston Brighton community. It's where I've had all my connections all my life. That certainly would be one of the considerations that would enter in. But I will be honest with you, most owners don't do that. Most owners don't devote that level of attention to helping people get what they need. And so when that happens, then people would get the benefit of the full prolonged notice period of the 5 years. Others can add to this from sort of what the experience has been with the city on that, but that's my understanding.
Is it possible for us to add during this process just some language around the accountability piece of that to ensure that landlords are doing their due diligence to ensure that they live up to that? Is there a way from an accountability standpoint to be able to push to ensure that that does happen, or even create a dashboard for when it doesn't, that we know who these usual suspects are?
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think we can, Mac, I don't think we're going to violate state law if we gave some more meat to what relocation assistance means or could mean. And then my understanding is that if we were providing a condo permit, if you will, I don't know what we're going to call it, or approval to condo, that that would be part of the criteria. We'd be looking at whether or not the owner provided that in a meaningful way, that met the requirements under the ordinance.
Yeah, and I have one last question. This is the bonus round here. I'm just curious in terms of when the landlord or the person who's going to build the condo, when they apply for it, is there a way to look at the medium, what the income is in the neighborhood, and make sure that if they are going to convert it into a condo, that it's financially reflective of the neighborhood that they're going to be building in? Is there a way, or is that illegal to do something like that? I'm just curious. Like, I think about people being displaced, and I think about just this whole notion of people coming in and building condos. Is there a way for us to add a clause or a line that will hold the condo creator to the medium income of the neighborhood and the lower end of it, actually?
I don't think.
I was,
Go ahead,
I was,
Mary.
I was thinking that, and this, due to the limitations in the state law, which seems to create rights and obligations between the tenants or occupants and the new purchaser. But it doesn't create any obligations or burdens or anything from between the new purchaser and the general neighborhood. So I think we're but limited by state law. They absolutely have to, Councilor Mejia, if the person is existing there, they have to keep their rent and they are limited by how much they can raise the rent every year for that particular person. So they would be, hopefully that person has a decent rent or a rent that they can sustain. But I don't think we can create, I like this idea. And I think we're gonna look more to expanding that analysis in the zoning code that we're talking about, the other amendment, the larger one that we're working on for fair housing, that we are absolutely including that analysis for those larger projects. We're doing that. But for this small, I don't believe we can create a general obligation between me as a purchaser and the area I'm purchasing in.
Yeah,
Turn it over to the expert.
I tend to agree with that. There are a couple of things to think about. One is there is the right to purchase. And so there might be a question of making sure that the residents who have the right to purchase are connected with whatever city programs and other things that are out there. So that, for example, if there was soft second or things like that, there was a way to sort of express those. In those few instances where, in fact, it might work. The person might, in fact, it wouldn't be so expensive. In many cases, unfortunately, it is going to be too expensive for people to stay, but in some cases it might work. The other thing is, on occasion, at least in the past, and I know this was true in the 1980s, some of the condo conversions that were happening were also happening in places where there was some other city hooks around housing creation. And so what the city actually did with those was allowed conversion, but then there was some new affordable housing that was created in those blocks. So there actually ended up being some BHA Chapter 705 condo units that actually were created as part of a conversion. I don't know if that's, I kind of don't think that's the economy we're in right now. I think that was kind of unique to the 80s. But on the other hand, if those handles exist, definitely they should be used to try to leverage whatever affordable housing opportunities you can create.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Councilor Mejia?
No, and I'm gonna be leaving and coming back, so I have a check-in that I have. Okay, thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Great ideas. Thank you. Councilor, we heard briefly from Councilor Flynn. I don't know if Councilor Janey had some questions.
Quickly, and I apologize. I've been,
No.
Can you hear me? My video's going in
Yes.
and out.
You are fine. I can hear you.
Yeah, I've been in and out of the hearing, so I apologize if I'm repeating. But I just wanted to be clear. We're talking about 4 units and below. So
nope,
small
4 units
landlords.
and above.
4 units and above. So are small landlords protected the same way we would seek to protect them when we were looking at short-term rentals, for example? So I guess if a smaller landlord of a 3-family house wanted to convert, are they able to do so? Do they have additional barriers?
Well, no, this doesn't apply to those landlords. So they have no obligations to protect the tenants. They have no obligation to give long-term leases or to provide rental assistance to the tenants.
Yeah. And so for 4 units and above, if a developer wants to come, there's a building, let's say, that has 8 apartments. And those are long-term leases with renters who had been there for quite some time. Maybe the apartments aren't in the best shape and the rents are not quite at market. A new developer buys this building, wants to start, working on the units. They want to convert them ultimately into condos. So they are responsible for relocating these tenants and finding
depending
them
on,
comparable housing.
Their response,
there are
yes.
several obligations that they would have for existing tenants. I can go through them, or Mac, you probably
I mean, I
wrote them,
heard
so
you
can go-
earlier, but not having like the presentation in writing, it was hard. I heard you earlier in the hearing going through some of those.
Yes, but you are correct, Counselor Janey. 4 and up with existing tenants, there are certain obligations, notice periods, so extension of the lease for 5 years for elderly, disabled, low-income individuals, 1 year for others, right of first refusal. Those tenants
To
have a
buy,
90-day
right? To purchase the
Yep.
condo itself. Excellent.
Correct, at market, and limitations on rent increase. So if they stay in there on their extended lease, as we just mentioned, they would, the landlord could not increase the rent more than 10% or CPI, consumer price index, I think it is. Am I saying that correct? And then
You are.
relocation assistance as well. They would be obligated to do those things.
Wonderful.
They couldn't
And are they
evict them but for
limited?
just cause eviction.
Are they limited to where they would relocate? I mean,
Only
ideally,
in
we
the-
want Boston residents to stay in Boston, but are there, if they couldn't find something comparable?
Yes.
So,
I
so
have,
that goes to
go
the
ahead.
2 versus 5 year notice period.
Mhm.
So during the first 2 years, if the person, let's say I found a comparable unit in the same neighborhood for that person, I might be able to limit their notice period to 2 years rather than 5. Again, it's extremely rare that you'll ever see that, but I guess it would be theoretically possible.
And are both the landlord and tenant able to look, or is one responsible for looking for something comparable? Like, whose burden is it to find something comparable?
The owners.
It's the owners. Yep.
Okay, great. I love that sailing, Chief Dillon.
Thank you.
Counselor Janey, any other
Since we're talking
questions?
about homes,
From the
I think that's it
guards?
for me. That's it for me on this round. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. I don't have the benefit of the legislation in front of me. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will absolutely, we can get that out to you. Apologize, Counselor Janey, for that, for the working session. So we've gone through the round with the tenant, or with the counselors, specifically on the rental or the condo permit. And I do think that that makes sense, and we should certainly work on some language about what that could look like within this. Within that language, looking at, as Counselor Mejia mentioned, make it effective or demonstrate a burden that they did attempt to reach out to the tenants in the language that they predominantly use. I think it's worth us doing the research about taking a 3-family and going up to a 4, 5, 6, or 7, and whether the statute would allow for us to attach that. I would like to. And then looking at the dashboard, or to be able to track who's doing the conversions and if they're violating the law, if they're, been several times been told that they're not able to or have violated the condo conversion. That's a big deal, I think. And then I just going into now the other provisions of the law. And this is on the notice periods. Right now, again, it's 5-year notice for elderly, disabled, low to moderate income tenants, and 1-year notice for others. Could we change that at all? Make everyone 5 years? Can we go over the 5 years? That's a question for notice periods. I'm just curious.
I think you could go over the 5 years. There's nothing written in stone about 5 years. Whether or not you could change the other one, and at some point, whether or not you'd get pushback, that's another question. I'm not sure about that.
Mac, is the 5 years in, so is there any limitations in the state enabling? I'm sort of looking at your summary, but I don't.
Sure. So the state enabling actually has 4. So the state enabling has a 4-year maximum period, but Boston has had 5 for quite some time without any challenge to that.
Until now.
And so, you theoretically could do longer, at some point you might begin to get others on another side lobbying about this.
Would it
Yeah,
make sense?
Yeah, we will, if we, just being practical for a split, if we do change it radically, I think we will have some probably legal challenges. Because I just want to make sure that we, don't waste a lot of time doing that.
Yep.
Agreed. I mean, I think the biggest hurdle we have is to get it to work, period, because they have the clear out. So, I mean, I'm not going to die on a hill for this, but I did want to know what was available to us.
Yep.
My other question, looking at right of first refusal, there's a 90-day right to purchase. Is that limited by statute? Can it be made a little longer?
I think you could make that longer. Again, unless 527 specifically says you can't do more than this, then I think that's the only language you have to worry about. And chapter 527 is that kind of language, which is where we get into with the 4 units. But I think on the 90-day, you probably do have flexibility on that.
And do we need to put in here, for example, I know with TOPA and other laws, they have a right, they have the right, or they can assign that right to a nonprofit or somebody else? Is that something that we could, do we need to put an assignment of right in here as well? Because
So
I believe many tenants cannot afford or organize or get the funding in 90 days, but they might
Right.
be able to work with a local CDC or work with somebody else that be willing to purchase, or they can assign their right to purchase with them to them.
So we should take a look at that. There was language that was added to one of the statewide amendments to chapter 527, which talked about assignment of rights to like a city or town where it was trying to create affordable housing. And so it was in that context that language was added. So we should look at that language because it's both an opportunity, but it may be an outside limitation. So we just need to be sure of which way it works.
I would be very interested in at least having that as an option if the city of Boston could be at the table. On the limitations on rent increases, again, the 10%, is that a number that can go down?
I think so. So I think you've got flexibility around some of those issues. Again, it needs to be a fair net operating income. So, you need to have some kind of system where if an owner were to say, I have an abominably low rent, and if you're going to make me keep this person here for 5 years and limit me to this really ridiculous low rent, you can run into problems with that. But as long as that can be reviewed or something like that to avoid hardships, then I think that would be the way around that. And again, I don't think the CPI or 10%, CPI probably, but I think the 10% you probably could mess around with. We should take a look at that.
And then there were certain suggestions about the relocation assistance that we should be more specific with what that looks like. And I didn't know if how specific we could be in terms of, allowing them to stay in the unit until an appropriate.
So one thought, and this may relate to Councilor Mejia's dashboard suggestion, is like a check-in point. So that if you're granting a permit, that at X time period, after the permit's been granted, you're checking back in with the residents to see what's the status, to make sure that people just didn't get cleared out and we never knew about it. And to see if there's some manipulation going on, or if on the other hand, it's all pretty straightforward. Maybe the person put in for public housing and they're waiting for their name to come up on the BHA list. And that's really what they want. So it could be a different conversation with each person, but having a check-in might be a really good thing to put into part of the regulatory system that could be done once you've granted a permit.
Okay, so a check-in, and also who would be responsible for that check-in? OHS?
might make sense. I'd leave this to the city about what they think on this.
Okay. So City of Boston would check in on the tenants. Okay. And that leave that open. And then there was the question of the relocation benefit. There was certainly some asks about increasing it. The $10,000 for low to moderate and income and elderly disabled to go to 15,000. And then for everyone else, which is currently at 6,000, to go to 10,000. I mean, if you think about it, it does, at least for the everyone else, going to 10,000 makes sense. I mean, we're giving out $4,000 checks right now for rent assistance and hoping it, they could stretch it. $6,000 seems, not, I don't think you could do first, last, and security on that sometime in many cases in Boston.
I think in the past, we've looked at rent in various neighborhoods and said first, last, security, maybe rent, so we should do the calculation again and sort of see where it takes us. We've never factored in, but maybe it was short-sighted, do people need ongoing rental, supplement? We just thought, I think we were always concerned about challenge, so we kept it to the first, like what would moving costs total, not what a supplemental rent be, but.
Right, and this is one where it was done, the amendments were done twice. I think once when Councilor Ross was chair of the Housing Committee, and I think a second time when Councilor Zakem was head of the Housing Committee. So we should just take a look to see how long ago it was that we did the last revision and what they might have done back then, and then sort of do updates.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I just feel, I hope I don't sound ridiculous, but I do think the $6,000, at least being everyone at 10, makes more financial sense. But okay, I just wanted to make sure I walked through the rest of the parts of the benefits about updating them again. Councilor Braden?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Councilor, sorry, George maybe out. Councilor Mejia? Oh, Councilor Bott, there you are. I didn't see you. That's why I swear I didn't skip over you intentionally.
No, no worries.
Bach?
I'm all good, Councilor Edwards. I just didn't want you to think I was gone.
Okay. Councilor Mejia, I know she was saying she was coming in or out. Councilor Flynn? And then Councilor Janey.
No, I'm okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. I don't know if we have any public questions or if we have any other thoughts. I had one question text to me. I'm going to try and pull it up about 3 families specifically. Can all 3 families be protected? Only exempted if the 3 family is owner occupied, but I think we cannot lower the standard. It's 4 families or up. Am I correct?
That's correct. You'd have to have a special enabling law to be able to reach smaller properties.
And I guess my question then to the administration is there appetite for a special enabling law in the next year or term? I understand the legislative term right now is very unlikely, but that we really look at triple deckers or just eliminate the 4-unit limit. Is there an appetite for that or thoughts around that?
I think it hasn't been our legislative priority, but I think we should talk about it, Counselor.
Mm-hmm.
Given, maybe I'm just discouraged because especially today about 4 or 5 amendments are going to be discussed at the State House.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, to get passed. But, I think we should talk about it. I don't have an answer right now.
That's fair. You came in to talk about this legislation, not proposing other ones, so that's fair. So I guess I want to make sure that I have my marching orders and understanding what we could do together. One is the language that you have for creating this permit. a condo permit or conversion permit, right? And getting that together. 2 would be, and this is research I think we could all do, but what happens if it's going above 3? I think we need to have that answer. That would help, I think, a lot. There might be actually some more people that are brought into the statute. The dashboard is something, do we need to legislate that, or could that just be done in-house? Legislate it? We don't need to, right?
I think if you give yourself regulatory authority around the permit, then you can capture a bunch of things that you might want to do. And that's what Somerville did. And so I think that was helpful for them to have done that.
Okay, put it in the permit. And then I think the right to assign, we're going to check on that, but the right to purchase, what limitations are on that? Is the city okay with that? Is there, with that language or that right being included?
I think so, as long as it doesn't trigger, legal challenges.
No, I understand. And if it's already in there in some part, already limiting maybe their right to assign to the city anyway, we'll just make sure it's consistent and not go beyond that. I just want to be clear to folks. I understand your concerns, Sheila, that if we push too much in revising or increasing this, then what little protections we have will be challenged and likely be caught up in court. Though I do trust the legal team. We went up against Airbnb and we're quite successful, but I do think the real issue is getting this to work as it is, period. Right?
That's true. I don't want to risk what we have or what we could strengthen for relatively some gains that may not.
They'll be as good as the piece of paper they're written on. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm excited to work on the permit language and making sure we get something where all of the colleagues are comfortable with it. So it's 11:22, and unless my colleagues have further questions, or unless the administration has further questions about this.
No, I think, there was just a couple of other ideas that came up that I think we need to explore some language on. And I did really strengthening the language, how are people being communicated with, and are there appropriate languages being used? And then Councillor Bach had mentioned, what are the penalty for violations? And I think we need to explore that a little bit with Corporation Council.
Yep.
Right. Excellent. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and end this working session, and we're going to get to work. I want to thank you all for being here, for hanging out. I apologize to my colleagues who are going to come and try and log back on after they've stepped away, but thank you. This
Thank you.
has now
Thank
ended.
you.
Thank
you all.
Thank you. Appreciate it.